Good evening. You're watching the main news on ATV. I'm Anne Reesom.
And I'm Edna Zeh. Here are tonight's top stories.
Growing concern and outrage over arrest and secret detention of Hong Kong activist visiting dissident's wife in Beijing.
Hong Kong government condemned for being powerless to do something about local journalists being beaten up in Beijing.
Chinese Foreign Minister warns Japan not to escalate territorial tensions and urges restraint in punishing North Korea. There's growing outrage and concern in Hong Kong about the fate of a local activist who was arrested and secretly detained in Beijing.
Yeung Hong got into trouble while trying to visit jailed dissident Liu Xiaobo's wife, who was under house arrest.
Hong Kong delegates to China's parliament and top political advisory body are trying to get answers from mainland authorities, but there has been no response so far. ATV's Emily Sue reports.
This footage from Beijing shows Liu activist Yeung Hong being taken away by mainland police when he was waiting for a taxi last night. One of China's most high-profile dissidents, Hu Jia, posted the video online. Hu quoted witnesses as saying that the Hong Kong activist was first surrounded by a group of more than 10 men, then beaten, pinned down and shoved into a police car by plainclothes officers. ATV tried to call Yeung all day, but his cell phone had been switched off. The SAR's Beijing office said it had not yet received any calls from Yeung for assistance. Yeung was in Beijing to visit jailed dissident Liu Xiaobo's wife, Liu Xia, in her apartment, where she has been under house arrest since her husband won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2010. Police arrested Yeung and his 3 mainland companions on Thursday when they tried to call out for Liu outside her apartment using loud hailers. They were released early yesterday morning. But the group returned to Liu Xia's apartment later in the afternoon in a second attempt to see Liu in person. They failed again as security personnel stopped them from approaching the house. This incident is giving China unwelcome attention as the world's media are gathered in Beijing for the annual session of the nation's parliament and top political advisory body ahead of the big leadership transition. Legislator and CPPCC delegate Tam Yu-chung said in Beijing that he's still trying to understand what happened, but warned everyone to be more careful during sensitive periods such as now. Local NBC delegate Miriam Lau urged the central government to increase transparency as the Hong Kong public is greatly concerned about Yeung's arrest and whereabouts. She said she will bring up the issue during NPC meetings this week if she sees an opportunity. Yeung Hong made his name as the captain of the fishing boat that took a group of Hong Kong activists to land on the disputed Diaoyu Islands for the first time in 16 years last summer. Emily Sue, ATV News.
The SAR government is under fire for being powerless to demand action after Hong Kong journalists were attacked and beaten up by security personnel in Beijing yesterday.
Lawmakers have condemned the chief executive for remaining silent, and they're demanding a full investigation.
This is what happened yesterday afternoon when Hong Kong reporters and cameramen were covering Diaoyu activist Yeung Hong's visit to Liu Xia's house. Liu Xia has been under house arrest since her jailed dissident husband Liu Xiaobo won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2010. The Hong Kong journalists were attacked by a group of men who shoved them to the ground, kicking, punching and stomping on them. Facing outrage on the home front over the brutality of mainland security personnel, the government issued a response last night saying it was highly concerned and called for normal and lawful reporting by Hong Kong journalists on the mainland to be respected. The statement said the government would ask about the situation through the SAR's Beijing office. But many here see it as a weak and unacceptable response when the eyes of the world are on Beijing as China goes through a leadership transition.
When the leaders of the country are discussing country affairs in the Great Hall of the People and talk about how they will govern and manage the country according to law, just these few TV shots will prove them utterly wrong. And that leaves an impression that China has a lot to be done to catch up on the rule of law before she can claim to be a world country of world class.
Many feel that Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying has shown his weakest as a leader by remaining silent instead of having the courage to come out and immediately condemn the attack.
There is nothing more to be investigated, particularly when he said he would be asking the Hong Kong office in Beijing to continue with investigation. We all know that the Hong Kong office has no power to do any investigation. So this is simply an official statement that does not answer to the sentiments of Hong Kong people. This is to be regretted, and it is most disappointing.
The Democratic Party's Albert Ho questioned why Secretary for Security Lai Tong-kwok had not spoken up.
And I think the Secretary for Security also owed a duty to Hong Kong people that he must take firm action to express the view and the anxiety of the general public, and to impress on the central government that they have to discharge the duty properly.
Former NPC delegate Wong Kwok Kin from the pro-Beijing Federation of Trade Unions said the fact that China allowed a well-known activist like Yeung Hong to enter the country during the nation's top annual political meeting shows that it is loosening up, so he finds it puzzling there was such a confrontation. This morning, the League of Social Democrats, Democratic Party and ADPL held separate protest marches to Beijing's liaison office in Weston to condemn yesterday's incident as an attack on press freedom. Radical lawmaker Leung Kwok-hung declared that if leading officials don't pressure the central government to launch an investigation, they're just turning a blind eye to injustice.
That means they kowtow to those people who arrest Mr. Liu Xiaobo and put Mr. Liu Sha under house arrest. They just put their head down, pretending they haven't seen anything, assaulting reporters, arrest people who pay visit to Mr. Liu Sha. They don't have any integrity anymore.
Executive Councillor Barry Zheng also called on Beijing to take action.
So I hope the authorities will follow up this matter, and so I hope the authorities will enforce the law to make sure the culprits are brought to justice.
Back in Beijing, Hong Kong NPC delegates brought up the incident during a meeting this afternoon. Senior NPC official Li Fei did not respond, but Hong Kong delegates said they would continue to demand an investigation. NPC delegate Ma Fung Kwok said a number of members voiced their concerns about the attack, but there was no discussion. Ma said the main argument was whether or not the Hong Kong journalists had permission and were reporting legally, and that if they were, there is no reason why they should be subject to violence. Former police commissioner and now CPPCC delegate Tang King-shing called it a severe case, as not only reporters, but anyone traveling to another country carrying out law-abiding duties should be protected by the local government.
If you've been choking under the blanket of smog covering Hong Kong, be warned that it's going to last for a couple of days more.
Roadside pollution levels hit more than 200 on the measuring index today, making it risky for people to venture outdoors. ATV's Bo Leung reports.
For the second day running, those who ventured out onto the streets found themselves breathing in foul air as the city choked under a blanket of smog. The air pollution index at the roadside monitoring station in Causeway Bay hit more than 202 this morning, the highest pollution reading of the year so far. Roadside stations in Mong Kok and Central recorded readings ranging from 130 to 185 throughout the day. All 11 general stations recorded high to very high pollution levels. When the index exceeds 100, children, the elderly and others with heart or respiratory illnesses are warned to avoid physical exertion and outdoor activities. When it goes above 200, it's not just children, the elderly and the infirm who are in danger. The general public is also advised to reduce outdoor activities. The main pollutant in the air is nitrogen dioxide, which comes from vehicle exhaust, and the amounts recorded yesterday and today far exceed World Health Organization safety guidelines. Environmental group Friends of the Earth expressed alarm, saying it was another wake-up call for the government to get cracking on the measures it has already promised.
We urge the government to speed up the process to retrofit the buses and rationalize the bus route, and also implements the commercial vehicle replacement subsidy scheme as soon as possible.
Government officials concerned say winds are not strong enough to disperse pollutants in the air, and the smog will remain for a few days.
Under such conditions, winds will be light, and there may be some areas experiencing low visibility. For example, in central, visibility fell to around 5 km this morning. We expect this ridge of high pressure to persist for the rest of today and tomorrow.
The city's worst roadside pollution recording was in August last year, when it hit 212. Berlin, ATV News.
China's outgoing foreign minister is urging calm and restraint in dealing with North Korea after Beijing backed new sanctions to stop Pyongyang's nuclear program.
Yang Jiechi also warned Japan not to escalate tensions over the Diaoyu Islands, blaming Tokyo for the situation.
On the sidelines of the annual session of the National People's Congress in Beijing today, outgoing Foreign Minister Yang Jiechi reflected China's thinking on some pressing international issues. He made it clear that China would be more actively involved in foreign affairs and do its part to make the international system more just. Addressing the bitter territorial dispute between China and Japan over the Diaoyu Islands, Yang put the blame squarely on Tokyo. China believes Japan should face reality, practically correct its mistakes and work with China to properly resolve relevant issues through dialogue and negotiation, prevent the situation from escalating out of control, he said. Yang said it's up to Japan to improve its relations with China and play a positive and responsible role to maintain peace, stability and development in the region. He reiterated that the islets have been China's inherent territory since ancient times, and the current situation has been caused by Japan's illegal seizure and occupation of Chinese territory. Yang also took a shot at the U.S., saying while China welcomes a constructive American role in the Asia-Pacific region, at the same time, Washington needs to respect Beijing's interests and concerns. This follows a meeting between U.S. President Barack Obama and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in Washington last month. The pair reaffirmed their bilateral security alliance, which requires the U.S. to defend Japan if it ever comes under attack. The Foreign Minister also rejected accusations that the country's military was behind massive hacking attacks on American and other foreign targets. Yang described it as a politically motivated smear campaign, declaring the cyberspace needs rules and cooperation, not war. He insisted that China is also vulnerable to cyber attacks and suffers the most. The North Korean problem was also on his mind. While China is North Korea's biggest mentor and ally, on Tuesday it agreed with Western powers on imposing new sanctions on Pyongyang to punish the regime for conducting its third nuclear test last month. But today, Yang stressed that sanctions are not the ultimate solution. China has always believed that sanctions are not the end of Security Council actions, nor are sanctions the fundamental way to solve the relevant issues, he said. He urged all sides to exercise calm and restraint. North Korea today formally rejected the UN Security Council resolution that demands an end to its nuclear arms program. The sanctions are aimed at tightening financial restrictions and cracking down on North Korea's attempt to transport banned cargo. Pyongyang said it would pursue its goal of becoming a full-fledged nuclear weapons state, despite the latest round of punishment.
Mainland inflation has jumped to its highest in 10 months as holiday spending for the Lunar New Year drove food prices sharply higher.
The consumer price index rose 3.2% in February compared with January's 2%. New data from the National Bureau of Statistics today shows mainlanders paid 3.2% more for goods and services in February than they did a year ago, as holiday season spending and rapid credit growth accelerated price rises. That's the highest CPI reading since April last year, when it climbed 3.4%. Inflation is a key issue for Beijing's leaders, as it brings with it the threat of social unrest, as mainlanders grumble about the rising cost of living. The rise in the consumer price index, which is the main gauge of inflation, was due to the cost of food surging 6% to its highest in 9 months. In a statement released with the new figures, the Statistics Bureau said, going into March with the Lunar New Year impact fading and weather turning better, all conditions become favourable for food production and transportation, and the March CPI is expected to ease from February. If prices continue to increase, authorities may have to seek tighter controls over monetary policy, which could in turn hurt China's economic expansion plans. In other data out of Beijing today, retail sales had their weakest start to a year since 2004, after new leaders cracked down on extravagance. Retail sales increased 12.3% in the first 2 months of 2013, compared with the same period last year. Output from the mainland's millions of factories and workshops rose 9.9% in the first 2 months of the year, in a fresh sign of an uneven recovery taking hold in the world's second biggest economy. Fixed asset investment, which has driven the economic recovery so far, grew faster than expected at 21.2% in the first 2 months of 2013, compared with the same period a year ago. The producer price index, which measures the cost of goods at the farm and factory gate, dropped 1.6% in February for the 12th month in a row. The PPI fell in March last year, its first drop since December 2009. Still to come on ATV's main news tonight. Suicide bomber kills 9 civilians outside Afghan Defense Ministry in Kabul.
Venezuela swears in deputy of late Hugo Chavez as president ahead of snap elections.
Reports directly from the heart of Europe. Every week, business insiders and analysts keep you at the forefront of current economic developments. Check in current news, made in Germany, tonight at 8.
From the best-selling American author of more than 50 books, Dr. Stanley has spread his messages across many countries to heal people's souls. Learn to control your life. Don't be afraid. In Touch with Dr. Charles Stanley, every Sunday afternoon at 2.
Nothing could have prepared them for this. But could they have prepared for the one that came after the tsunami? Looking back at 3/11. Mega tsunami. Hidden perils. Sunday night at 10. Every day we learn. From him. From her. From someone we barely know. But what does it mean to you and me? Find out the answers on Global 3000. Thursday night at 8.
In the face of global economic meltdown, world leaders pointed fingers at each other, desperate to find the one who crashed the world. United States, Iceland. No one was immune from the meltdown's devastation. No one was safe. Meltdown, a global tsunami. Thursday night at 9.
Neighbours or strangers?
陳生，出面落緊雨啊，你冇帶遮啊？不如我遮埋你啊！
好啊，唔該晒。A little care can break down barriers.
Welcome back. More local news, starting with the Education Minister addressing concerns about new rules for student loans. Bo Lang reports.
Education Secretary Eddie Ng has asked parents and students not to worry when new rules under the Student Financial Assistance Agency are in place. From April, higher education students who apply for a government loan must provide their parents' payslips as proof of income. Otherwise, their parents must declare their assets to get a certificate from the Inland Revenue Department. Ng said the application review process has always been fair, so there will be no abuse of the system. But some students are already complaining it will be inconvenient and affect those who apply for loans. Urban Renewal Authority Chairman Barry Jung says the government's measures to curb property speculation are proving effective, and he has noticed over the past few days that developers have lowered prices. But he did acknowledge concerns that the curbs might have an impact on developers who want to rebuild or renovate old buildings. Jung suggested exemptions for some property developers. Chinese University Vice-Chancellor Joseph Sung says the source of the novel coronavirus, which has killed 8 people in the Middle East, is still unclear. On a radio program today, Sung said the symptoms are similar to the SARS virus, which attacked Hong Kong 10 years ago. He's confident that if people coming to Hong Kong from the Middle East fall ill with coronavirus symptoms, it can be diagnosed quickly because the World Health Organization has provided test samples of the virus for medical experts to detect the disease. But some medical professionals warned there is still no effective treatment for SARS or the new coronavirus and called on the government to provide more resources for research. Bo Leung, ATV News.
A suicide bomber on a bicycle struck outside the Afghan Defense Ministry today, killing at least 9 civilians, as the new U.S. Defense Secretary was visiting Kabul.
But first, in our roundup of international news, the hand-picked successor to Venezuela's Hugo Chavez has been sworn in as interim president. As hundreds of Hugo Chavez supporters cheered and watched on giant screens in the Venezuelan capital Caracas, his protege, Nicolás Maduro, was sworn in as acting president. Just hours after paying tribute to Chavez at his state funeral, Maduro promised to continue his predecessor's socialist revolution and called for snap elections. The 50-year-old was later sworn in again in front of Chavez's coffin at the military academy where his body lay in state. We shall be loyal to his political ideals. We will spend our whole lives constructing an independent fatherland, Maduro said. Wearing the presidential sash, Maduro swore in Chavez's son-in-law, Jorge Riaza, as his vice president and running mate in an election likely to be held next month. But Enrique Capriles, tipped as the opposition's candidate in the upcoming election, said, "Nicolás, nobody elected you president. The people didn't vote for you, kid." Capriles, who lost to Chavez in the October presidential election, argued that the constitution requires the vice president to step down from his post in order to run for president. Earlier, Maduro stood before world leaders, celebrities and throngs of mourners gathered for Chavez's funeral. He pledged eternal loyalty to the late leftist leader. More than 30 world leaders, including Cuba's Raúl Castro, Spanish Crown Prince Felipe de Borbón, and Iran's Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, were there yesterday to say their final farewells. Other big names in the crowd included Hollywood star Sean Penn and civil rights leader Jesse Jackson, who said he hoped this week's events will bring the US and Venezuela closer together. In Afghanistan, a suicide bomber on a bicycle struck outside the Defense Ministry, killing civilians, as US Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel visited Kabul today. Witnesses said the blast rocked the entire area. The Taliban claimed responsibility for the attack in the Afghan capital and said it was meant as a message to the new US defense chief. A Pentagon spokesman said the secretary was in a briefing at a US-led military coalition facility in another part of the city when the explosion occurred. He said Hagel's briefing continued without interruption. At the Vatican in Rome, cardinals gathered from all over the world have set a date this Tuesday for the conclave to elect the next pope to replace Benedict, who stepped down. The cardinals have had a busy past few days, debating behind closed doors about issues facing the church and just who they want to lead their 1.2 billion followers around the world. The Bishop of Hong Kong, Cardinal John Tong, is making history by becoming the first Hong Konger to vote for a pope. On Tuesday, after a Mass in St. Peter's Basilica, he'll join the other cardinals as they vote by secret ballot in the Sistine Chapel. The cardinals will vote until one candidate receives at least 2/3 or 77% of their support. One thing is clear, they fully expect to have a new pontiff named in time for conclave members to return to their homes to lead Easter celebrations. Turning to sport, and on a leaderboard filled with the biggest stars in golf, the biggest star of all is at the very top of the WGC Cadillac Championship.
Push it a little way.
Tiger Woods fired an outstanding 7 under par 65 to open up a 2-shot lead after the second round of the competition. Woods stands at 13 under for the tournament, with Northern Ireland's Graham McDowell 2 strokes behind in second place after a bogey-free 65. But fellow Irishman and world #1 Rory McIlroy shot his lowest round of the season, adding a 69 to his opening 73 to lie 2 under par. At the Mexico Rally, Frenchman Sébastien Ogier leads after the first full day of the race. Ogier stretched his lead to 30 seconds despite the best efforts of his Norwegian rival Mads Ostberg. Leading overnight, the Frenchman won the opening stage before he was overtaken by Ostberg, who won the next 2. But a masterful drive in the 6th stage put Ogier back in front and allowed him to maintain his lead.
A look at the weather before we leave you. And Hong Kong enjoyed some mild and sunny weather today, but it was spoiled by the highest pollution levels so far this year. Temperatures ranged between 18.1 and 26.1 degrees, and the relative humidity varied from 55 to 74%. Winds were light. Just a reminder that the fire danger warning is red, which means there's an extreme risk of fires. Checking on the ultraviolet reading, the maximum recorded for the day was 7. And tomorrow's UV levels will also be about 7. Here's a look at the weather around the region. A ridge of high pressure will continue to bring fine weather conditions to the South China coast. And moving on to the satellite images, we can see the weather is generally fine over the South China coastal areas. And here's the outlook for the next few days. Mainly fine and dry tomorrow, but still polluted. Temperatures will range from 19 to 26 degrees. More of the same, but turning humid on Monday with the mercury hitting a high of 24 degrees. The sun may disappear on Thursday with temperatures dipping slightly to between 17 and 23 degrees. Let's see if the bad air will stay with us tomorrow. General stations will be medium to very high at 50 to 100, and roadside pollution levels will be very high at 125 to 185. Now the weather in other cities around the world. That's the main news for Saturday night. I'll have an update in an hour. I'm Edna Zhe.
And I'm Anne-Marie Sim. Thanks for watching ATV. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Good night.
Night.
Coming up, Made in Germany.
Keeping them honest is what we do. So many questions out there, someone has to ask. Face-to-face challenge. And all the hottest topics are only on Newsline. Every Sunday night at 8.
They are just ordinary children, living an ordinary life. But things will definitely change as soon as they discover one of the greatest writers of all time.
It's the
Documentary World for the Love of Shakespeare. Sunday night at 9.
What happens out there is real. Get the latest European news and current affairs. Whatever happens, when it happens, you're always the first to know. Check in current news. European Journal, every Monday night at 8. Stay close to fresh K-pop from the hottest selling artists to the up-and-coming superstars. Keep in touch with the latest chart of the Korean pop music scene on Samsung Digital Special. Pops in Seoul, Thursday at 6:25 p.m. Pick up a camera and they're ready to go. For better or worse, their work has let us see the real India.